Rajender Bansal and Ors. Versus Bhuru. Civil Appeal No. 8194 of 2016. Introduction. The case of Rajender Bansal and others versus Bhuru is an important Supreme Court judgment on motor accident compensation under the Motor Vehicles Act, 1988. The court explained how just and reasonable compensation should be calculated and stressed that courts must follow settled principles while assessing income, dependency, and other heads of compensation. The judgment is useful for understanding uniformity and fairness in MACT awards. Facts of the case. In this case, a motor vehicle accident caused the death of a person. The legal heirs filed a claim petition before the Motor Accident Claims Tribunal, MACT. The tribunal awarded compensation. However, one party challenged the amount as either excessive or inadequately calculated. The dispute reached the Supreme Court to examine whether the correct method had been applied in fixing compensation. Issues before the court. The main issues were whether the compensation awarded was just and reasonable, whether the correct multiplier and method were applied, and whether the courts below had properly considered income, age, dependency, and conventional heads while awarding compensation. Judgment of the court. The Supreme Court held that compensation under the Motor Vehicles Act must be fair, reasonable, and consistent with settled law. The court examined the calculation and corrected the award where necessary to ensure that it reflected actual loss suffered by the dependents. The court emphasized adherence to established guidelines to avoid arbitrary awards. Reasoning of the court. The court reasoned that the Motor Vehicles Act is a beneficial and welfare legislation. Therefore, tribunals and courts must adopt a practical and humane approach, not a technical one. At the same time, compensation cannot be speculative or excessive. The court highlighted the need for standardized principles so that similarly placed claimants receive similar compensation. Legal principles laid down. The court reiterated that compensation must be determined on the basis of age of the deceased, income, number of dependents, and the appropriate multiplier. Conventional heads such as loss of consortium, loss of estate, and funeral expenses should be awarded as per settled norms. The aim is to grant just compensation, neither a windfall nor a pittance. Significance of the judgment. This judgment is significant because it promotes consistency and predictability in motor accident compensation cases. It guides MACTs and appellate courts to follow uniform standards, thereby reducing unnecessary litigation and appeals. It also protects the interests of both claimants and insurers. Relevance for LLB examinations. The case is important for LLB students studying Motor Vehicles Act and Law of Torts. It is useful for problem-based questions on calculation of compensation and for explaining the concept of just compensation. Conclusion. In conclusion, Rajender Bansal and Ors. Versus Bhuru reinforces the principle that compensation under the Motor Vehicles Act must be just, fair, and based on settled legal principles. The Supreme Court's approach balances social justice for victims with legal certainty, making this case highly relevant for LLB examinations.